From the center of the universe and the home of your Grey Cup champion Toronto Argonauts, it's the X's and Argos podcast.
Welcome to the X's and Argos bi-week podcast, brought to you by Something in the Water Brewing. Ben Grant, joined today by Mike Hogan, who is substituting for JB, still on vacation. Mike, first of all, before we get into anything else, thanks so much for joining me today. I really appreciate you being on the show.
I need one of those JB jobs where you can just take the whole summer off and just go gallivanting around North America. That's a good gig.
It is not a bad gig. So, he's enjoying himself. And I believe, I've been misled before, but I believe he'll be back next week. So looking forward to that. But in the meantime,
I'm sure he won't be. I'll be ready for the call.
Yeah, I know. Stand by for sure. So we've got a huge lineup for today. We've got a lot of stuff to talk about, including the stretch that the Argos are about to go on. We're going to talk about the Argos being back on top of the power rankings again. There's some PFF scores to go through. 3 Down Nation did their mid-season awards, and the Argos were really well represented. We'll go through that. I also want to talk about what players do on a bye week. It's one of the questions that I've received a couple times. There's news about Shaq Richardson signing in Calgary, which a number of you have also reached out about. We want to talk about Henoc Muamba. We're going to talk about the quarterback position. Plus, we've got the usual weekly segments, Put Me Down for 20 and CFL Picks. All that and more coming up on this episode of the X's and Argos podcast. This episode of the X's and Argos podcast, as all the episodes are this year, are brought to you by Something in the Water Brewing. It's a brewery located in Liberty Village. It's the perfect location for Argos fans. You're just steps away from Lamport Stadium, where the Argos practice. You are also steps away from BMO Field, where the Argos play their games. It's a great place to go to pre-game. And of course, the next game coming up against Calgary, a Friday. That would be a great time to leave work, head down to Liberty Village, visit Something in the Water, and you can get Longboat Pale Ale, a beer that is made specifically for fans of the Double Blue. So make sure you check that out when you get a chance. Terrific beer, and they've been an amazing sponsor to us this season. So, Hoagie, here we are heading into the game against Calgary, but this is the third bye. Before we get into the bye stuff and the next run, what do fans need to do to join you and I at BMO Field against Calgary in a week's time?
Oh, thank you for asking. The best thing you do is buy tickets. This game is the best value that we have all year, right? Because it's the CNE game. You buy an Argo ticket for the regular price, and you get free admission to the CNE, which is, let's say you got a family of 4. It's $25 for an adult. It's $20 for a kid or $20 for a senior. So that adds up in a hurry. So if you were planning on going to the CNE anyway, it's not a bad time to double up and a great time to expose new fans to Argo football. There are a lot of folks maybe even listening right now who aren't the diehards and maybe get the one game a year or haven't been down in years. It's an opportunity to kind of say, okay, let's go check out the Argo game because I was going to go down to the CNE anyway. So if it's $25 to get in and you buy a $40 ticket, it's $15 to go and watch an Argo game from a pretty good seat. So, and I know a lot of people are hit hard by inflation, and it's never a bad time to get a deal. So not only that, but you can see a game that the Argos, I'm sure, are keen to win after what happened in Calgary a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, for sure. And like you say, it's amazing, an amazing deal. And we talked about on the broadcast last week, we talked about the food building. There was an article in the Star yesterday highlighting some of those treats. Hoagie, are you going to be joining me for some pickled cotton candy?
Ew, no. I'm not cotton candy guy at the best of times. I have a sweet tooth, guilty, but cotton candy a little bit much. But why would you do that with pickle flavor? I know there's some bizarre stuff, and for those who want to indulge, feel free. It's part of the fun of the X is going to the food building and trying something you haven't even thought of in a nightmare, and you go, okay, I'll try it. What the hell? You only live once.
I may give that one a go. We'll see. So
you're serious? That's a thing?
It's a thing. Yeah, pickled cotton candy. It's a thing. There's some strange ones. That one jumped out to me. I think there's 10 of them that they highlighted in a Star article that I saw this morning.
Do me a favor, whatever you have, do it after the game. I don't need to be looking for a color commentator midway through the third quarter.
All right, that sounds good. So this Calgary game starts off a tough stretch for the Argos. This having an early bye like this is tough. And we knew this like as soon as the schedule came out. I remember JB and I going through the schedule back in December when it came out, and we're looking through. We're like, oh man, first week bye again for the second year in a row, and that's really what you're checking out. Like who you play, which weeks, that matters less to me. Bye week scheduling to me is really important, and this I have to think is a disadvantage because they're going into a 10-game stretch coming out of this bye. And the first 6 of these games are tough. You start off against Calgary, and we know what Toronto looked like against Calgary last time. It wasn't a great game for them. I have to think they'll be looking to avenge that loss, their only loss of the season. And then you've got Hamilton, Montreal, Hamilton, Winnipeg, and those 2 games against Montreal, 2 games against Hamilton are going to go a long way to deciding the East. If the Argos can go through that Hamilton, Hamilton stretch and go like 3-1 or even 4-0, that's basically it. I think the East is done at that stage. That's their opportunity to earn themselves a late season bye, or at least earn themselves a late season rest where they can start rotating guys in and get guys healthy. Because we know at that point in the season, your body needs it. Like this is for anyone who hasn't played before, and certainly at this level, every week is like getting into an automobile accident. And so as you go down the final stretch of the season, the more rest you can have, the better position it puts them in. And obviously sealing the top spot and having the first week playoff bye is huge. But if Coach Dinwiddie can rest guys those last 2 weeks of the season as well, rotate them through to keep them fresh, that would be a massive advantage. So that's just something to think about as we go through this next stretch, like how important that is because of the lack of bye.
Well, the other thing that really becomes imperative, and not looking past the Calgary game at all because you can't, and if you lose that one, it kind of sets back what you're doing down the stretch. The tiebreaker comes into play. And right now, they've got the tiebreaker on Hamilton. They need a win. They've got the tiebreaker on Montreal. They need a win. And they also have the tiebreaker on Ottawa. They need a win to clinch the tiebreaker. So that kind of sets up when you're looking at, the magic number in terms of points, that eliminates the odd number where you could use that tie to break a tiebreaker. So it's almost like a 3-point game, a 4-point game, almost like a 5-point game when you look at it that way, because it does eliminate that tiebreaker. So the games against Hamilton and Montreal are huge, as is the game against Calgary.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I love about football. There being so few games, the magnitude of each is such a big deal. Like the Jays go on a 3 or 4 game losing streak. You're like, it'll be okay. In the CFL and the NFL, whatever football league, that's death. You have to string together wins, and so this stretch is going to be massive for the Argos, even with the start they've had.
And that's why I totally disavow the theory of a trap game in football. I just don't think that exists, because you're looking one game at a time. I know it's a cliche, and before I worked for the organization, to a degree, I kind of agreed that teams would be looking 2 or 3 games ahead. I can tell you with certainty they don't. They're looking at Calgary, period, full stop. All they're doing is looking at film of Calgary. The coaches may want to get a little bit ahead, and a bye week like this is not necessarily a bye week for everybody. I guarantee you coaches are going through some film after the family goes to bed. They're preparing a little bit more for Hamilton and Montreal, and even more so after the games this weekend. But for the players, they're looking at Calgary because that's all they're doing is they're looking at film of Calgary.
Let's get into some of the PFF scores this week. The Argos, as you would expect for a 7-1 team, have done very well on PFF. No surprise that DaVaris Daniels was the top scorer of the week. He posted a huge number, over 9. Anytime you're over 90, that's massive by PFF scoring. Not surprising, Hoagie, because of his 3-touchdown, 180-yard performance. I think we would have been very skeptical of PFF had he finished anything but first overall. But what a game from DaVaris.
Yeah, no question. And it was like we've been waiting for that game from him. Maybe not to that extent, but, that 2-touchdown, 125-yard game is something that we've been waiting for. Likewise, Curly Gittens Jr. So we can kind of check that one off for Didi, and now let's go get it for Curly. But he was in a great mood in the room after the game, obviously, and also a good game for him because he surpassed a career mark with 5,000 career yards. He did that, I think, on the third long catch. So yeah, it's great. He needed that one, I think. We've seen flashes, but we haven't seen that game from DaVaris. And likewise with Curley. Everybody seems now to have had the big game in terms of being a wide receiver. Brissett, Ungerer, like Phillips, they've all done it. Now it's up for KG2 to get up in there as well.
And if you want to read a little bit more about how DaVaris Daniels put together that 3-touchdown game, I went through it on an article on 3Down that you can find and read through each of those 3 plays and what he did specifically to get himself open against that Red Blacks defense. Other PFF scores, Chad Kelly was the top quarterback of the week. That should come as no surprise. He had the one interception. It's just the one negative play. I couldn't find another negative play for him in the entire game. He had 4 great touchdown passes, just looked like a leader out there. And we were heading into the week not 100% sure what we were going to get from Chad Kelly, and for him to come out and have a performance like that, the PFF score says it. It was that might have been his best game of the entire season.
Yeah, he was dynamite, and it was not only the receivers getting wide open; it was him seeing the receiver and getting them the ball. How many times have you been to a game where you can kind of see the whole field, and you'll see a receiver wide open, and you're up in the stands going, "Why didn't he see him?" It's a big field for one thing, and they were on the same page, which was fantastic. And I was very happy that Kelly statistically was rewarded with that little shovel pass to AJ Ouellette as a touchdown pass, because how many times have we seen Kelly hit a receiver and they're brought down inside the 5-yard line, and then they finish it up with a running touchdown when it was a 45 or 50-yard pass that put them in the position for the score. So, we had one of those in Halifax in the Saskatchewan game to Brissett, where it was a 1-yard touchdown pass, and I was happy that they were able to kind of get his stats up a little bit in terms of touchdowns, because if it comes down to it, at the end of the season and he's still in contention for the MOP, I'm sure a lot of voters will look at touchdown passes, not realizing that, a lot of passes put them in the position to score a rushing touchdown. So for Chad, I was happy he got that little gimme to Ouellette, and a very smart play to get it to him.
Yeah, well, he drew the defender in. I love that play so much. He was he saw Ouellette fairly early. His receivers were blanketed downfield. He saw Ouellette leaking out. He drifted to his right to create separation between he and Ouellette. And so he draws the defender to him and then just dumps it over his head, and Ouellette's got no one near him for the touchdown. But that's why I like things like PFF scores. And I don't always agree with PFF. We're often at odds, but in theory, it's better than looking at things like stats, because like you say, the stats can be very misleading. If you've got receivers that go down or out of bounds at the 1 or 2 yard line, that's almost always going to end up in a touchdown for somebody else on the ground. And so, yeah, scores like this, I think, help to even that out a little bit.
And the problem is, for PFF, and this is no disrespect to PFF, I mean, it's a valuable service, but you do have to kind of take it in stride, where you could have a defensive player make a play even though he was in the wrong place. You know what I mean? Like,
yes.
that wasn't his assignment. He blew the assignment but made the play anyway. Same as an offensive lineman. He may not do something that he was supposed to do, but was able to make a block. So to somebody who doesn't know the scheme, they may say, oh, he made his block on that. Likewise, a receiver may run the wrong route but make the catch. There's a lot of little things that they don't know. So PFF score is going to be different than a team's grade, but I agree. It's great to have something, and just anything you can add to the conversation to get people talking, I think, is valuable for the CFL.
Yeah, and it's the best we can do because we don't have access, inside the locker room and knowing what the assignments are and what the play calls exactly were. So we are guessing at the best of times when I'm doing analysis, whether it's on TSN radio with you during the call or whether it's an article the following week. I don't really know. I don't know exactly what the coverage was supposed to be. I think I do. I have a sense of what I see, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's right 100% of the time. So same with PFF. It's an educated guess, but you're right. You have to sometimes take it with a grain of salt because they're not in the huddle, just like we're not.
One of my favorite memories of somebody doing the games, one of your predecessors, Jeff Johnson, was 1 year out of football. So he had played with the Argos the previous year. And I am the guy that will never blame a receiver or a quarterback for an interception or an incomplete pass because I don't know the route. I don't know the read. I don't know who made the mistake, if anybody made the mistake. And during one play, I said, I don't know who to blame on that, the receiver or the quarterback. And JJ said, I know the play. I know the playbook. That was on the receiver. So that's one instance where JJ had one up on you because he actually knew what the read was.
Yeah, that's a huge advantage to be. Yeah, you can only hang on to it for about a year or so though, because then things start to change and develop, and coaches change and everything else. But yeah, that's massive to be able to bring that to the booth. I think that's fun. Other good PFF scores for the week. Dejon Allen was top lineman, which is awesome to see him back there again. He's had an amazing season. He's sort of, to me, like Allen is a little bit like the Dwayne Hendricks of the offense, where two guys that I think are at the top of the league in their position, or at least 1-2. And yet don't get talked about a lot. And so for Allen, I grade offensive lineman every week, and he's my top graded offensive lineman. Again, I'm doing it without knowing exactly what everyone's assignments are, but I think he's been the best for Toronto in what has been a very good offensive line this year. And so I was happy to see him get that acknowledgement this week once again. And they graded as the top O-line of the week as a whole, which is a huge compliment to the returning Isaiah Cage and getting Darius Sirocco back and Peter Nicastro back over to that guard spot. It just looked like such a solid unit. Not only did they not give up a sack last week, the pressures they did give up were often Kelly deciding to take that on. He was actually inviting pressure, like I said in that previous play, to open up AJ Ouellette or to buy time for his receiver downfield. He didn't need to take a hit, but he chose to in order to give his receiver an advantage. So not hits that you necessarily put on the offensive line. So they looked amazing last week.
Let's talk about Allen a little bit, or allow me to, because
Please.
He's a guy who has gotten lost, as you say, really underappreciated. He was a 4-year starter at the University of Hawaii, gave up 1 sack in 4 years, moved around the offensive line, and 2 times at the University of Hawaii was named their outstanding offensive player. Not the quarterback, not the running back, not a receiver. An offensive lineman 2 years in a row. Totally unheard of. He went to the NFL. They moved him inside. He's undersized for the NFL. He's 6'2", 300 pounds. So we're lucky to have him up here, for one thing. And let's not forget, when he came into the CFL, he started at left tackle. And then last year moved back to right tackle. And then last game, after Isaiah Cage was kind of out of his brain a little bit after the penalty, they moved him back to left tackle and then moved him back to right tackle for the rest of the game, which doesn't, okay, he's just doing that. Think about dancing backwards. That's what he's doing, because your footsteps completely change. Your footwork is completely different. I asked him about that last year before he moved over to the right side, and we knew that's where he was going. And he said, ever since I started in this, I practiced my footwork from both sides. So left or right doesn't matter to me. It sounds like it's an easy thing to do. It's not. And for him to be an all-star last year, he's playing at an all-star level this year. He's just that guy that doesn't get enough respect around the league, probably because he hasn't been a 5 or 6 time All-Star. And with offensive linemen, sometimes that's what it takes.
Yeah, and I'm hoping he gets that acknowledgement this year, because he has been so solid. Like he and Hendricks both. And I don't know what it is about both those guys, whether maybe they would draw more attention if they were 6'8" or something like that, and people around the league would notice more. He's, as you said, he's undersized, even by CFL standards for height for a tackle. But yeah, for some reason, he just seems not to get noticed the same way, because like Ryan Hunter, for example, does get that attention. He does get noticed, and Hunter's great, and not to take anything away from him, but I have Allen graded ahead of Hunter, and no one seems to be talking about him. So yeah, it's just one of those weird things where for whatever reason, the rest of the league seems not to notice, but yeah, he shows up every single week regardless.
Nobody looks at offensive linemen. Nobody looks at defensive tackles. Because, if you're watching the line play at all, you're probably watching defensive ends, and they usually end up with the greater pass rush numbers and sack numbers. But Hendricks on the inside against the run end, collapsing pockets and flushing guys out toward a Rimolade or Costigan or Robbie Smith or whoever's in there at the time. It's huge. He's so good and so undervalued. I'm glad you're talking about him.
And Jordan Williams also honored as the run defender of the week. Nice to see him back in there too, because he hadn't been at 100%. He'd been out for a couple of games. To have him back there playing, and I don't necessarily think of Jordan Williams as being a run defender first. I like him a lot in coverage for a linebacker, and so for him to get in there into that middle spot and shut down the Ottawa run, I thought was pretty big, and so nice for him to get that feather in his cap too as run defender of the week.
Yeah, he's great, and it gives him so much flexibility, especially when everybody's healthy, where you can move him. He can play the middle linebacker spot. He can play the weak side spot, inside, outside, doesn't matter. He's that guy. He can drop into coverage. He's great against the run. He's really good at firing and disguising his blitz. You don't know he's coming until the last second. So, he's been such a valuable part of this, and the more he plays, obviously he's been out of the lineup a little bit, but the more he plays, the more he's going to fit in and, get the Mace system through reps as opposed to just watching film.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think, like you say, the more he plays, the better it will get. You see that with Robertson Daniel and Darius Pickett playing off each other so beautifully, where they're so good at disguising each other's blitzes. So it's not just themselves. It's not just disguising when they're coming. It's actually creating a diversion, knowing that someone else from the other side is coming in. You see those guys all the time where Daniel's coming, but he doesn't move at all. Pickett, meanwhile, has got the quarterback's attention over here. It's like the way the Raptors hunt in Jurassic Park, where one is distracting you while the other one's actually the one who makes the kill. It's sort of that same thing they've got going on. And when Williams gets a little bit more acclimated to this too, those couple games out probably hurt a little bit. But it's just going to make it even more difficult for quarterbacks to figure out what's going on, as if it isn't difficult enough already.
I try to identify on the broadcast, at least give people an idea of what's going on. And it's either 4 on the front line, 5 on the front. They've got a 6-man front, and then all of a sudden 3 will, rush, and then somebody will come from 20 yards back. I mean, I love the way that Mace is disguising things, and you're right. The more the guys play together, and Daniel and Pickett are going to get even better as the season goes along. It's a nice luxury to have. But not only are these guys really talented physically, they're all pretty smart football players, because there have been very few blown coverages this year by the Argos.
And that's something and this will maybe we'll tie that into our next segment, because I want to talk about Dinwiddie and the players that he's brought in to his system. So I'll save that to this next segment here. Let's get into the 3 Down Nation mid-season awards. Mid-season awards, they don't necessarily mean anything. There's no physical award that's given mid-season like this, but it's a good indication of where a team's at. And the Argos definitely, after starting 7-1, are very much deserving of a number of mid-season awards. And it was nice to see them selected by the 3 Down Nation staff. And so a few awards that they won: Chad Kelly with the most outstanding player, which I think it was always going to be between he and Zach Collaros. And Kelly, to me, just has had a slightly better start than Collaros. He's got more wins for one. But it's also the rushing ability that stands out for me. So not just the touchdowns and the touchdown to interception ratio, love that, but the added ability for Kelly on the ground, to me, makes it an easy pick for Chad Kelly as the most outstanding player. We watch an Argos game, and he's the guy you focus on. And for him to be able to, in his first season as a starter, put up this kind of first half, we just can't wait to see what he produces in the second half. But yeah, I assume he would probably also be your pick for most outstanding player, getting to see him up close as you do.
There are 2 numbers, and these haven't been updated since last week, but they'll be even better after the Ottawa game. Here are 2 numbers that I still find are bizarre. The Argos are scoring basically a touchdown once every 4 times they get the ball. That's crazy. It was 24.4% going into the last game. They scored 4 offensive touchdowns last week, so that's going to be even better. And the other one that's eye-popping, because historically this has not been a great number for them, In the red zone, they're 76.2% of converting trips into the red zone into touchdowns. They did that last week on one of the Daniels catches. They did it on the Dukes touchdown, and they did it on the Ouellette touchdown. So they scored 3 times in the red zone last week at least. So that's just top of head. I wish I had written that down, but I think those were the 3. So it's going to go up. It's going to be up around 80% of trips into the red zone becoming touchdowns. That's crazy. So yeah, those are a couple of the numbers that don't get talked about enough. But that's Kelly and company, and it's not just Chad, and it's not just the receivers, and it's not just Ouellette, and it's not just the O-line. That is absolutely a team statistic. But the guy that's running the controls has been the guy that's kind of got them there, and everything that everybody expected. And I think to a person inside the Argos organization, we expected Chad to be really good this year, without question. But I think he's surpassed everybody's expectations in several aspects, and those 2 stats are just mind-numbing.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and yeah, I think it was 5 offensive touchdowns last week, and so because I think it was the 4 passing touchdowns and then the Dukes sneak as well, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, their conversion rate is absurd. But yeah, so many numbers like that. You can't expect those to hold over the course of the season. But we said that back in week 3 that these numbers won't hold up, and yet here we are now going into week 11, and those numbers are still pretty gaudy. So
and they increased their points per game.
I know.
Like they're think about this. They've had 3 games at BMO Field. They've averaged 40 points a game at home, and almost 40 points a game overall. It's insane what they're doing. And again, if you want to come out and watch the show, argonauts.ca for tickets. How was that? Was that good?
Yeah, no, well, it's actually happening too. Like I see it firsthand. A friend of mine came out to the game last week. First time that he had been to an Argos game. Brought his 2 kids as well. First time they had been to an Argos game. Weren't really that exposed to football either. They're begging him to go back to the game against Calgary because they had such a good time just as a family to be able to. And it was a spur of the moment thing. They were actually going for a bike ride. Happened to be near BMO Field. Knew the Argos were playing that night. And we're like, you know what? Let's lock up our bikes and see if we can go get tickets. And yeah, they had a blast. And now they're looking at coming back again. And they've already started talking about, well, what do season tickets cost for next year? Everything else.
Nice.
So yeah, it's not hard to see why that happens when you see a game like that. Guys on the fan the next morning talking about it being one of the best sporting experiences that they had been to, and this is something that everyone's saying. It was probably the most entertaining game of the CFL season last time out. So hoping we can have more of the same.
I ran some numbers this week, and this is just the public figures, so anybody could have done this as long as they had a pen and a calculator. In 2022, our total attendance through 3 games at BMO was 32,581. This year, 41,236. It's an increase of 8,655 or 26.6%. Obviously the same percentage increase, but we've gone from 10,800 a game to 13,700 a game. That's big. That's 2,800 people a game, almost 2,900 people a game. The 4th game last year of the season was 11,623, and that was a Saturday against Hamilton.
And I think that was also Lady Gaga and Drake playing.
Yes, but I won't let the cat out of the bag, but we were way past 11,000 for the next game. So, and that's with a week and a half to go. So, yeah, we're going to have a big crowd, bigger than normal, coming up against Calgary. The CNE game obviously has a lot to do with it, but it's also, like you say, people are experiencing what we're doing on the field and in the stands and all of the bells and whistles that go with a night out at an Argonaut game and going, why the hell haven't I been doing this longer? And people are coming back. The crowd is a lot younger, too. Not only at the games, but on television. So a lot of work has gone on into trying to cultivate that younger crowd. And we're seeing it now at the gate. And the number of youth football groups that are coming through into our games is phenomenal. I spoke to 2 of them before the last home game, and they were pumped. They're ready to go. And I asked them to put up their hand how many had been to an Argo game before, and it was probably 75% who had. So that to me was very good because I'll go in and talk to groups, and to a large extent, some of them are experiencing the Argos at BMO for the first time. And now it's getting those people to come back. And as long as the games are fun, and they have been, it's easier to bring them back.
No, absolutely. And getting back to the midseason awards,
Oh, I'm sorry.
no, that's okay. This is good. This is good stuff. But we, as always, when you and I get together, there's a lot of stuff to talk about. We often end up on a different topic than the one we started on, but it's all tied together, and it's all Argos football. So Javon Leake wins the most outstanding special teams player. What a turnaround for the Argos special teams unit, for Mickey Donovan. Last year, they had so much trouble in the return game. And this year, not only to not have trouble, but to have at the midway point of the season, the most valuable special teams player, as voted by 3 Down Nation, in Javon Leake with his 3 touchdowns. It's not just him. And that's the thing. I don't want to take praise away from Javon Leake, because he is doing a job and he's doing it remarkably well. Special teams is so dependent on blocking in the return game, and returners I often get all the credit, almost always get all the credit, but all of those guys, whether across the board, whether it's Adeboboye, Kassar, Haggerty, there's so many contributors in these units that make one other guy look good, in this case Javon Leake. Again, not to take it away from him, he's been outstanding, but to me, having him as the most outstanding special teams player, that really is acknowledging the entire unit, not just one person.
It's a great combination, and not only are the blocks there, sometimes when they're not, he's still making something happen. There were the 2 big returns last week. There was the one that ended up around midfield. It was about a 40-yard return, and it was along the east sideline. And there was an instance about 10 yards into the run where the old Gale Sayers line was, I need 18 inches of daylight or whatever it was. And that's all he had, and he squeezed through it. And it added another 15, 20, 25 yards to the return. That's a gift to be able to do that. And he's got the speed. We know, even back in college when he was at Maryland, he was the Big 12 or Big 10, returner of the year, special teams player of the year. He's always had that. And I don't know how many times I saw him last year after a game, either that night or the next week, and saying, you need one more block. And he's like going, yeah, I know. And those blocks are being made this year, and he's taken advantage of it. And statistically, not only an average per return, he was number 1 in the league before last week, and he had some big returns. And he's got the 3 punt return touchdowns. This just in, Javon Leake is the best punt returner in the Canadian Football League, period, full stop.
Yeah, and I don't think that can be debated. And so that's an amazing development for a team that didn't even really need scoring from their special teams unit, because their offensive production has been so great. But they've really come through, and I couldn't be happier for Coach Donovan in seeing that turnaround. Let's talk a little bit about Ryan Dinwiddie, because he was the coach of the year at the midway point for 3 Down Nation. I teased this in the last segment. One of my favorite things about Coach Dinwiddie is what he has prioritized in bringing in free agents, and what he's prioritized in re-signing guys. It's football smarts. You got to be able to play as well, but he's a very intelligent guy to start with. He's got a really good X's and O's brain. He's a great leader. He's looked for players with similar attributes. He's looked for players who are smart football players, who study, who aren't afraid to put in that mental work, and whose play on the field is definitely complemented by the mental side of things, because football is so much more a cerebral brain than I think most people are, or a cerebral game than most people are aware of. And for him to, show this through the players he's brought in, I think is really a testament to what he's about as a football coach.
I try to get, after our broadcast wraps up, I try to get down to the room as quickly as possible. I never hear Dinwiddie's speeches. When I get there, it's usually in time for Mickey Donovan's presentation for the special teams player of the game and the belt, which is great. But Aiden Miller's our social media guy and gets some great video. The most eye-opening video that have seen all year was, whether it be from training camp, games, practices, whatever. It was after, I believe, the BC game, the second home game. and Dinwiddie was addressing the team. And he said something to me that underscored exactly everything that you just said. And he said, this is your locker room. You guys get it. I don't have to worry about what happens in the locker room anymore. So the culture that he's tried to bring in over the first 2.5 years, in Dinwiddie's mind, he's successful. Is he going to get mad every once in a while? Hell yeah. Every coach is a perfectionist, and every time they see a breakdown, they're going to get upset. But he's brought in, along with Pinball and Vince Magri and Murph and Alex. I mean, these are the guys that have put this team together. And coaches have input as well. Donovan's going to have input. Mace is going to have input. Ivan, all of these, they're all going to have input as to who they want to come in. And they put together a group of not only great players, but guys who get it. And when I saw Dinwiddie say that, that's a big statement for Ryan Dinwiddie to make, a very big statement. And I'm sure everybody in that room heard that sentence. And I went, wow, he's got faith in us. And you've coached a long time. You don't always have faith in your players. But when they earn your trust, that's gold. And for the Argos this year, very early in the season, they earned the trust of their head coach. And that means a lot to the players.
And his record speaks for itself. Dinwiddie, since coming into the league, has been I thought he should have been Coach of the Year last season, but the voting ends up going about a year behind. But this is not, and this is not to say that his acknowledgement right now at this point in the season is anything based on what he did last year. He's taken a first-year starting quarterback and a team with a target on their back after winning the Grey Cup last year and put together the most impressive run in the league this season at 7-1. So yeah, definitely hats off to Coach Dinwiddie for very much deserving that Coach of the Midway Point honor. Other honorable mentions, Robertson Daniel was the second runner-up for most outstanding defensive player, which I think is huge. Ryan Hunter, second runner-up for most outstanding offensive lineman, and Qantas Stiggers, most outstanding rookie runner-up. Let's talk about Qantas Stiggers just for a moment. We've talked about him a lot on the broadcast, a player that both you and I have really loved watching. He's second runner-up to Dustin Crum, who gets more attention as a starting quarterback, but Qantas Stiggers as a true rookie in more of a way than you can usually ever be in the CFL has been a highly valuable piece in the Argos secondary.
He's in his NFL draft year, put it that way. He's still a kid who had no college football experience. His only quote-unquote pro experience was in the fan-controlled football league. And for those who don't know the story, how he got up here, John Murphy got a call one day from a guy who was a coach here in Toronto twice, a guy by the name of John Jenkins. He was first here in 97, so the second Flutie year. Was it 96 or 97? He was here for one of the Flutie years. And as the offensive coordinator, longtime football coach. He was coaching in the Fan Control Football League. He called up Murphy and said, "Hey, Murph, I got a guy for you." And it was Qantas Stiggers, who last year played pro football at the age of 20. Figure that one out. Led the league in interceptions, had 3 in one game. I mean, he's just that guy. And when you saw him at camp, I think at first everybody just saw him as an interesting story and a name on the roster that nobody could put anything to. And then basically every day he started picking off passes. And it was like, who's this kid? And very quickly earned the trust. Josh Bell, I interviewed Coach Bell, the defensive backs coach, about 3 or 4 days probably into training camp. And I was doing a story on Stiggers because he was just kind of popping off the page. And he said, I already trust him to play 5 of the 6 back-end positions. And he's a week roughly into camp. And that's incredible. Not only the physical aspect this guy brings, he's got great ball skills. He high points the ball almost every time, but he can bring it physically as well. He's a thick body. Like you look at him, you look at his numbers, and he actually looks bigger than his height and weight are listed. He's just been a great story, and he's only going to get better. And I know it's already been written about. I think it was Chris O'Leary wrote the story at CFL.ca saying, enjoy him, Argo fans, because this kid's going to be in the NFL soon.
Yeah, I think he'll be in the NFL next season. He's impressed me since training camp. Sitting the very first day that I went to watch training camp, I'm still getting used to all the numbers. You got like 100 guys out there. I'm looking at all these New Jersey numbers, and there's repeated numbers with blue and white jersey, offense and defense. And the number of times I had to look down and be like, who's this? Oh, Qantas Stiggers, right. And I did it like 6 or 7 times during that first practice. And I'm like, okay, this kid is going to be something. So, yeah, great to watch him play. And we've seen a little bit of that range from him. They've started, really trusting him to do some things that you don't typically ask rookies to do. And so the complexity of what Coach Bell and Coach Mace and Coach Fields, the respect that they have for his ability and his intelligence, his ability to comprehend what's going on, I think is massive. Let's talk a little bit about the bye week, Hoagie. What players do, what coaches do. You're around the organization. What happens on a bye week?
For the most part, guys will shut it down. They'll obviously continue to stay in shape and do their workout regimen. Guys who remain in Toronto, if they need treatment, they'll go in and they'll get that done. A lot of the guys go home. The American, even the Canadians, like guys who aren't from the Toronto area, they get out of town. A lot have families. They're stationed somewhere in the United States or Western Canada or somewhere outside Toronto. Their wife may be working. They've got kids at home. They go home and they become husband, daddy for a while, or go back and just see friends and family and just kind of check out of the day-to-day grind, because it is, even though they've had these bye weeks of plenty so far, it's still a mental grind. So the opportunity to go back and spend some time with their family and get that done and be a normal human being for a while, and guarantee they're either up really early in the morning, like Robertson Daniel, up at 3:30 or 4:30 every morning, having his honey tea and watching video. He's probably still in that mindset and in that regimen, but still is able to do it, with friends and family. So you're able to get more of a normal life. Coaches are still going to coach. They're still looking at Calgary, maybe getting a little bit ahead with Hamilton and Montreal. But for the most part, it's a time to check out. For guys in the front office, it's a time to kind of catch up on some old paperwork and maybe get a little bit ahead in some of the other projects. But for some guys, they don't get any time off. Vince Magri's down, touring NFL camps right now. Alex Russell's still looking at videotape. Bimbal Clemens is still in conversation with his coach and players every day. So it's life goes on, but just at a reduced rate.
I always found coaching with bye weeks, I would be so excited to get to a bye week because you're exhausted. It's a grind. It's just nonstop work. And to get to a bye week, you're like, okay, good, I'll have a game. But that would last about 24 hours. And I'd be like, okay, what can I do now? And one of the big things that you have a chance to do in a bye week is actually self-scout a little bit more than you usually do, to go back through your own film and say, okay, well, let me approach this. If I were coaching against my own team here, what do I see? What are my tendencies? What are my, what are the things we have to maybe watch out for as teams start to adapt to us or start to plan for us? And so that was the biggest advantage of a bye week, was the self-scouting. You do that throughout the year anyway. Every week you self-scout, but you get more time to actually sit down and do that during a bye.
Yeah, maybe players will do that a little bit more as well, look at their own stuff as opposed to just studying the man or men they may be up against that week. Just kind of to go back and a lot of times, guys are tipping off things and maybe not even realize it. I know in the 2012 breakup here, where the Argos had so much success against John Cornish and the Calgary run game and the Calgary offense as a whole, Ricky Foley told me that one of the offensive linemen on Calgary was tipping every play, and obviously didn't realize it. And it was the scouting that week that did that. Maybe guys can go back and take a look and say, you're doing this on every run play and doing this on every pass play, and they may not even realize it. So it's a chance to go and clean up some bad habits.
And it's usually your own teammates that will let you know that first. Sometimes it gets that far where it's another team taking advantage of it. But often in practice, you'll have, after a practice, one guy really stands out in a practice and he'll go up to an O lineman or a receiver after the play and say, hey, you know how I knew that was a run every time, or whatever it is, this is what you're doing. But sometimes it's so subtle that no one's picking it up there. And it's just through grinding tape that you notice that little hint that you're giving the other team that they're taking advantage of. So yeah, this is a really valuable time, obviously, for coaching, for coaches, for players, and it gives them a chance to get their bodies right a little bit going into this final stretch. Shaq Richardson, Toronto halfback from last season, has signed in Calgary. I've always been a big fan of Shaq Richardson. I got a lot of questions about him this year because he didn't sign a contract with anyone in the league, and now signing with Calgary, a team he's been with before. I think he came into the league with Calgary back before their Grey Cup run. Mm-hmm. And he's back in the CFL, and the Argos' next game is against Calgary, so they'll get to see Shaq if he's in the lineup at that point. I think the question I got a lot about Shaq was, why hasn't he signed anywhere? What's going on with that? I think when you look at the Argos, and it was a question for me early in the offseason. I was like, why aren't they bringing back Shaq Richardson? But then when you see the plans start taking shape, Shaq's position right now is being played by Robertson Daniel, who is right now one of the stars of the CFL on defense. I just talked about him being the second runner-up for most outstanding defensive player, and that's at the exact same position. And so you start to see now what the plan was. You've got this guy, Robertson Daniel, who hadn't been healthy, who had been he just had the worst luck of anybody, seemingly getting hurt in the first few snaps in back-to-back seasons, and now getting a chance to see really what his potential was and how good a halfback he is. And suddenly that non-signing makes a little bit of sense because they're already have a wealth of talent. And it's just, as good as Shaq can be at times, it was really not needed in this room because of all the bodies they had and the presence of Robertson Daniel.
Yeah, and Robertson Daniel, I'm so happy for him this year because when you take the COVID year into account as well, I think he played 3 games in 3 years, and that's tough. And the talent was always there. I admit I was a little bit surprised first day of camp when they had him lined up inside and Robert Priester lined up on the corner, because I thought it was going to work out the other way. The Priester was going to fill in for Richardson and they were going to move Robertson outside. But Robbie, right from day one, again, we talked about Stiggers in camp. Daniel was probably better in terms of that guy that every day you were noticing something he would do, whether it be in Skelly or in teams, and he would just pop off the field at you and go, boy, he's been really good, and it was a new position for him, and he looked at it as a challenge. And I did an article on him earlier, probably about 3 weeks ago. I think it was just after the 3-pick game, and I asked him about the move to Sam, and he said, I expect to be slower at the beginning of the season, like at camp, and I got to get quicker. And as mentioned, I wasn't kidding. He said he gets up at 4:30 every morning, and we'll for a couple of hours watch game film before he reports to camp. So he's ahead of the game and ahead of the curve and knows what they're going to be doing when he gets to the office. He's been great. And Richardson was great. No question about that. Had a big pick in the Grey Cup last year. But when you've got Daniel coming back, when you wanted to see what they had in Stiggers, don't forget Maurice Carnell IV. Don't forget Robert Priester. We've forgotten about Carnell because everybody's played so well, but Mo's in there every day at camp. He's rehabbing. He's getting stronger every day. He's going to be knocking on the door, and he doesn't want to sit on the bench. He's a guy who's going to want to try and find his way into the lineup. And when he did last year, all he did was intercept passes basically every game. So they're deep. And unfortunately for the Argos in this instance, there's a salary cap. So some tough decisions have to get made. And unfortunately for Shaq here, he seems to be one of them. I don't know everything behind what happened and why he didn't re-sign. I don't know if it was how much was on him. I don't know how much was on the organization. But for whatever reason, he's out there, and I'm happy for him that he got a gig back in a system that he knows and in a city that he knows. And yeah, he's going to be fired up, I think, on the 25th when they come to town. Tickets available for that game, by the way, at argonauts.ca.
And we can transition into looking at a few of those topics that you brought up. I've had a lot of questions about Henoc Muamba from the start of the season because Henoc was the star of the Grey Cup. We talked about Shaq having a big interception. Henoc had a huge interception, was the outstanding player of the game, was the most outstanding Canadian of the Grey Cup game. He did it all. And the Argos, with their amazing start this year at 7-1, have done all of this without Henoc Muamba. And the question I keep getting is, how far is he away with that knee injury? When is he coming back? Is there a role for him when he comes back? And the truth is, these are really tough questions to answer because we don't know exactly what's going on, inside his knee, or what the coaches are thinking, what the front office is thinking. But we got a few guys. You got Henoc Muamba, you got Maurice Carnell who's coming back, Dariusz Bladek who's working his way back. These are tough questions to answer, but fans are curious because you've got all these great players. Priester, we can add as well, who has been has looked really good at times in preseason and was supposed to kind of be the starting corner. You've got all these different guys that are getting healthier. When do we see any of these guys? What do you think is in their futures this season as we look at guys like Henoc and Bladek and Carnell and Priester?
I don't know the health situation for any of those guys. The only guy that I ask about his health is Carnell. And he's kind of got that Pinball Clemens personality, right? He's always positive. He says, I am getting stronger. I'm getting closer. And I haven't asked either Henoc or Bladek how their recovery is coming along. I know it's advantageous from a salary cap perspective to 6-game these guys, just in case. And you can always pull them off the 6th game. You have to pay the penalty, obviously, and go back. But just in case they're extended injuries, you put them on the 6th game with the opportunity to pull them off. So with those two, I don't know. But, right now, it's not like they need any of them. Team 7-1. And if and when they're ready to go, I don't know what they do. It's an interesting question and a valid question, and I honestly don't know the answer because right now they've got so much depth on this team at basically every position. It's a good position to be in that you don't have to rush somebody off the injured list. But when they're ready to go, it does present a pretty interesting dilemma and a good problem to have for the Argos.
And it's also really tough to gauge just watching players doing rehab because guys can look excellent. We've seen this before too, where guys coming back, like Carnell, for example, working really hard on the rehab field and trying to get back into health. We know that injuries like that take a long time to heal, but you might be able to run in a way where you're like, oh, that guy looks ready to go. But there's a big difference between being able to run in a straight line and playing a football game, especially at these positions that we're talking about, to be able to take on contact, to be able to fight somebody off, to be able to change direction quickly. When you're talking about things like knees, you have to make sure you're 100% ready, because if you're not, you're going to end up back on the sideline again, re-injuring that knee or whatever it was. So that's why I think sometimes it takes longer. And you might, if you're going to practice and you see guys doing rehab work or trying to get healthy, they might look in great shape, but it's a big difference between that and getting back on the field.
It's better to take one more game off than be put back on the 6th game.
Let's talk about the quarterback position. We got a chance to see a little bit about the state of things without Chad Kelly in the game against Calgary. Cameron Duke's getting some extended play, playing for almost 3 quarters. And I've had a lot of questions about whether or not the Argos might look into getting another quarterback going down the stretch, whether it be signing someone to a practice roster or just bringing in another guy to take a look at in the case of, what happens if, knocking on wood, that it doesn't have but what if Chad Kelly was to go down or was to be held out for a couple of games due to an injury? We haven't seen Brian Scott yet in a game, not a non-preseason game. We saw Cameron Dukes for a little bit. I think at this stage, I feel like the coaching staff has got faith in these two guys as being able to come along. And I think the hope is within the organization that if they can wrap up the East with a couple of weeks to spare, there you would get some valuable playing time for Cameron Dukes and for Brian Scott. I don't think, just based on where we are in the season, I don't think bringing in somebody else at this stage is something you're looking at doing. Scott and Dukes have been here from the word go. They know the system now. They've got a familiarity with the plays, with the players. I don't think that there's any answer or any incentive really to bring in somebody else for this season. Not saying you wouldn't bring in another quarterback maybe as a project or someone to look at for next year, for down the road, but I just can't see a move like that being made now. I think if something like that were going to happen, it would have happened already. And the fact that it hasn't, to me, says the Argos are happy with what they've got in the quarterback room, or that there's no one else that they feel is an improvement on what they have in the quarterback room.
Yeah, the chance of somebody coming up or coming in and displacing one of those guys on the depth chart right now is the odds would be long. Put it that way. That doesn't mean that they're not continually looking for guys to add. There have been some fairly significant names on the negotiation list. I don't know how many are still on the neg list because that can change daily. But Vince Magri, as mentioned, Alex Russell, John Murphy have all been, looking at NFL camps and seeing who's available. And I'm sure that there have been some names added. The list is lengthy. You have room, and I'm sure they've got guys on there. The other thing that comes into play here is how many American quarterbacks think it's worthwhile to commit to coming up to a Canadian Football League team to be placed on the practice roster where they're not making a hell of a lot of money, as opposed to keeping themselves out there just in case there's an injury in an NFL camp and they think they've got an opportunity to go in and get on the practice roster there. So with quarterbacks, it's probably a case where you're going to do something in the off season more than you're going to do it in mid season. But that doesn't mean the Argos aren't continually adding quarterback names to the neg list.
It is time for Put Me Down for 20. And Hoagie, before we get into this segment, I just want to remind everybody that while sports betting can be a fun way to enhance your sports viewing experience, it's important to do so responsibly. Certainly do not take any of my advice seriously, especially don't take any of JB's advice seriously. And he sent me his picks for this week. Only bet an amount that you'd be happy to lose. And of course, look at it as entertainment. And if you or anyone you know develops a problem with gambling, you can always call the Ontario Problem Gambling Helpline, 1-888-230-3505. So the state of things as we are right now, the 200 golden fleeces that both JB and I started with at the top of the season, I'm standing at 296 golden fleeces, and JB is at 104 golden. No, he's at 104 golden fleeces. We'll give you our picks for this week. So we don't have an Argos bet to make this week with the Argos on the bye. And so we're budgeting our 20 golden fleeces of the week for other games. So for JB, he's looking to make some golden fleeces back in a hurry here. He's got a parlay to start with. He's got Hamilton on the money line and under 44.5 in that game for plus 175. So he's got 10 golden fleeces on that one. And he is taking Ottawa to win by between 1 and 6 points for plus 350 on that one. So he is swinging for the fences, having lost almost 100 golden fleeces already. He's looking to make it back in a hurry. We'll see how that works out for JB. For my picks for the week, I've got 10 golden fleeces on Saskatchewan plus 9.5 against the BC Lions. and that's actually at even money. I actually like Saskatchewan to win this game. I know BC has looked outstanding at times. I know Saskatchewan has looked really rough at times. They're coming off a pretty tough loss to Montreal. I think the Saskatchewan team is a lot better than they've looked most of the year. And I know they've struggled with quarterback play, since losing their starter. That happens. I think Saskatchewan is going to surprise a lot of people. I'm not quite confident enough to pick them on the money line this week, but plus 9.5 points, I really like that play. And then my other 10 Golden Fleeces are on Ottawa's Justin Hardy with under 56.5 yards receiving. And so those are my two plays of this week. It's a tough one with the Argos not playing, but those I like. And if you really felt inclined, you could take a gamble on Saskatchewan on the money line, which is a pretty big payout. Hoagie, I had Edmonton last week as one of my bets. I felt like they were going to upset the Blue Bombers, and they got off to that huge, I think it was 22-0 start.
Yeah.
And then
you should have turned off the TV after the third quarter. You would have been fine.
I know. Well, it's funny. I actually said to a number of people just through text, as soon as Collaros got injured and Brown came in, I thought, at that point, I think Winnipeg's going to win this game. They had planned for Collaros so well, and I think Chris Jones, some coaches have a quarterback's number, and Chris Jones has Zach Collaros' number, even though it hasn't always turned into wins. Collaros has a lot of trouble against him, even against some of those Edmonton teams that haven't been able to beat anybody. They've given Winnipeg problems, and it's largely with Zach Collaros. And so as soon as he went out of the game, even though it was 22-0, I was like, you know what, Winnipeg's gonna come back and win this game. They torched Edmonton from that point forward.
Isn't it astonishing how many times, and the Argos have probably seen this more than any, where a backup quarterback comes in at some point in the game and just torches the opponent. And how many times have we seen that in Toronto? Some no name that nobody's ever heard of before that game or never hears from after that game comes in and puts up 350. Like, it happens not only to Toronto but other teams. And I'm not saying that's the case with Drew Brown, who's been around for a little bit now. But like you say, teams prepare for one style quarterback, and if they get another one and don't know his tendencies, that can be really problematic for a defensive coordinator.
And I do think he is a good quarterback, but I don't think he's what he looked like last week. It's just so tough when you've prepared for one guy, especially when there's a slightly different skill set between two guys. There are always different tendencies. There are always different ways that guys read plays and plays that guys like versus plays that another quarterback likes. And you prepared all week, and especially for a guy like Collaros, where you're really working hard because you know he's one of the best quarterbacks in the league. And so everything is so specific to shutting him down, and suddenly that changes on you, and it's just like suddenly a whole different game. So that's why it happens to teams every season. We see it where, like you say, a guy comes in and looks like $1 million and then is never heard from again. But that's why it's about preparation. It's time for our CFL picks. So for this week, again, I've got JB's picks as well as my own. JB went a perfect 4-0 last week. I was 3-1. And so we are both now 26-13 on the season. This is just picking straight up winners. We've only got one different pick this. We have two different picks this week? No, we just have one different pick this week. Nope. It's two different picks this week. Sorry, I'm looking at the wrong week. So week 11, here's what we got. So Edmonton at Hamilton. We both got Hamilton in this game. JB has sworn not to take Edmonton ever again until they win because he's been burnt too many times picking the Elks. I just think Hamilton's the better football team. I am excited by the changes that Edmonton has made at quarterback. I think Ford is a really interesting guy to watch, a guy that I'm sort of cheering for on a personal level. Being a Canadian quarterback, I think it's always fun to root for a Canadian at that position. I just think Hamilton all around is a better football team. They're coming off a bye. They're playing at home. For me, that's a pretty easy pick. I know it's been a popular upset pick people have been making this week, picking the Elks, but I've learned my lesson there too. Winnipeg and Calgary, we've both got Winnipeg. I think this game's going to be tight though. I don't think you're going to see the same Drew Brown that you saw last week. I think Calgary is in full desperation mode. They were embarrassed last week in BC. I expect that team to come out with everything they've got. I think Winnipeg wins that in a nail biter. From Montreal at Ottawa, I've got Montreal. JB's got Ottawa. Ottawa looked really good last week against Toronto. That might have been their best game of the season. I actually think it was Ottawa's best game of the season last week. Certainly offensively, and the variety that they had. It wasn't just Dustin Crum running. He was actually throwing the ball very well against a tough Argos defense. But I think Montreal still is getting better, more consistent quarterback play. So I'm going to pick the Alouettes until they give me a reason not to. And then BC at Saskatchewan. This is my upset pick of the week. I'm not fully confident in it, but enough to take a gamble here. I'm taking Saskatchewan. JB is taking BC. Hoagie, which is the game you're most excited about? We got 4 good matchups, 4 games that are tough to call. What are you looking forward to watching this weekend?
As always, all of them for different reasons. But I'm kind of sick that way. I was geeked up for the like you for the Winnipeg Edmonton game because I wanted to see Trey Ford because I watched him so much at Waterloo. So I was interested in that. Edmonton Hamilton is going to be interesting, and Argo fans always have a cheering interest for a game that Hamilton is in. And obviously with the East-West thing, you always cheer for the Western team, like Western teams always cheer for the Eastern team when it's an interdivisional game. Winnipeg, Calgary, like you say, desperate teams, and the Argos ran into one a couple of weeks ago. You can't take that kind of team that's got some talent lightly, and I'm not saying Winnipeg's going to. I'm sure Winnipeg did a lot of self-evaluation after almost losing to Edmonton a week ago, so that's not going to be an easy game for either team. Montreal and Ottawa is going to be really interesting. I still think people are selling Montreal a little bit short. They were the question mark going into the season in the East, in my opinion, because we didn't know what they had. And Cody's played phenomenally well. And, that kid Mack has just been dynamite for them as a receiver. Their defense has played very well. Their special teams have been really good. They're a really good team, and I want to see how Ottawa bounces back after the loss in Toronto last week. And BC and Saskatchewan, that's going to be a really – I kind of agree. Again, like Calgary, Saskatchewan is getting pretty desperate, and you already see talk about will there be an Eastern team crossing over to the West this year. And if Calgary and Saskatchewan, don't pull off the upset every once in a while, it gets interesting really quickly. So, again, desperate football teams are always fun to watch. And I think this week with Calgary, with Hamilton, with Edmonton, and with Saskatchewan, you got teams that really need some points this week.
Yeah, absolutely. I haven't missed a CFL game. I think going back to 2017, I sometimes have to record them and watch them, sometimes even weeks later, but I always do catch up. These 4 are all going to be exciting. So yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing some good matchups. And like you say, there's a reason to watch every single game. Hoagie, I want to thank you so much for joining me today. It's been awesome having you on as a co-host. So yeah, really appreciate your time.
And thank you. I enjoy you. You guys are great. When I do drive into work, I kind of mix it up between driving and taking the GO train. But you and JB have been weekly riders with me on the ride to work. So I enjoy what you and all of the other podcasters do. It helps promote our game. And our next game, by the way, is August 25th. It's the CNE game against Calgary. Again, it's the best deal in the city. It really is. Not only do you get the Argos, which as a standalone is the best deal in the city, you also get the CNE as well. So the opportunity to save, family of 4, almost $100 with two parents and 2 kids. You're saving $90 if you were going to go to both events. So please consider coming down, watching our games live at BMO Field. It's going to be a fairly big crowd on the 25th. So we hope you're able to join us and hopefully get us closer to an all-important East Division regular season title.
Well, that will just about do it for us on this episode of the X's and Argos podcast. For Mike Hogan, this is Ben Grant saying so long, and may all your pre-snap reads be good ones. I'll see ya.
Go, Toronto Argos, go, go, go. Pull together, fight the foe, foe,